Climate Action Plan calls for is for all of the electricity that we consume in Grand Marais to be produced from renewable means. And so that means that all the stuff that comes through the wires needs to come from a clean power plant.
How can a small town on the North Shore of Lake Superior match the ambitious 100% renewable energy commitments of larger cities like Minneapolis or San Diego? Jay Arrowsmith DeCoux is the mayor of Grand Marais, Minnesota, a small community whose climate commitments were driven by activism among the town's young people. With a city-owned utility, Grand Marais is charting a new course to reduce both their reliance on imported energy and their carbon footprint. John Farrell, who directs the Energy Democracy Initiative at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, spoke with Jay to learn more about Grand Marais' progress to transition to cleaner local energy. We also note and apologize for the background noise that you may hear in the first part of this episode. This podcast is the latest episode in our special Voices of 100% series of local energy rules, where we're speaking with local leaders from across the country to understand what has motivated their cities to set ambitious clean energy commitments, how their cities plan to meet their goals, and what these visionaries see as the future of local renewable energy.
You're the mayor of Grand Marais. It's a small town on Lake Superior's North Shore, and I'm definitely interested in talking with you about your community's commitment to climate neutrality. But I want to just take one quick second to ask you a different question, which is, why are folks in Grand Marais on a wait list for your meat preservation class at the North House Folk School? What is so cool about that class?
I got to say, man, I didn't expect that question. It's something that a lot of people want to learn, and there's not a lot of outlets for that. And the beauty of that class is that you get to spend a ton of time focusing on a traditional craft that directly impacts your nutrition in your life. You know, it's something that you can do all the time once you understand the basics of how to work with the meat and how the equipment works. So I think that's a huge part of it, is that people are really eager to get back into those traditional ways of life, and that goes a long way. So I guess that's probably the best I can say for that.
That sounds just fine. I was just curious. It was fun, and I Googled you, and so that was one of the things that came up. And I was like, wow, this seems really cool. And I'll circle back to something sort of related in a way, because I think of that as sort of a form of sustainability that people get interested in, in the same way of like eating local or other kind of life choices. And we're going to come back to that word sustainability a little bit later, because I think it is really interesting. And there's an interesting way in which it comes up into this conversation. But let's talk about, something more topical, and a question you probably were more prepared for, which is that, the city of Grand Marais has made a commitment to being climate neutral by 2040, and including from the draft Climate Action Plan, 100% renewable energy by 2040. Can you explain a little bit about what climate neutral means, like what that commitment means for the city, and then also why is Grand Marais making that commitment?
There's a bunch of things that go into this, as there should be for anything this big. Any municipality or any governmental agency trying to take on something this big. Grand Marais is pretty directly in the way of, or in the crosshairs of climate change. We experience tremendous flooding, where we have experienced tremendous flooding events in the past 10 years, two of which have been described as millennial events. So if you're looking at that, you're just like, wait a minute, how are we describing these events, and why is this happening? Why is this something that we have to deal with now, when for so long we hadn't had to even think about it? So that's one of the things, is that the governmental structure is seeing this as something that we need to address as we move forward, because if we don't, then running the government is just going to get even more and more expensive, because we won't be able to function in our downtown core area, because the downtown is going to be flooded. We've already put together a plan that if we did everything in the plan, it would be a $4 million plan for stormwater management for the town, to update our stormwater management to more accurately reflect the events that we've been experiencing. So that's on the ground. Like, that's real money, and that's coming from people who live here, people who choose to live here. And that's something that we don't.
I was just wondering if, for context, you could, like, 4 million could be a lot or a little, depending. But you're talking about a community of about 5,000 people, so this is a lot of money relative to, like.
No, we're talking a community of 1,300. Like this is Grand Marais. This isn't Cook County. Like, Cook County itself is 5,000 people. Grand Marais is 1,300. So we're talking about a teeny tiny tax base, and this is like, we're the only city in Cook County, the only municipality in the entire county, and if how are we gonna keep people being able to live here? That's really the concern, is that, like, it's somewhat of an existential situation. We are right on the water, and this spring they're talking about Lake Superior levels being at an all-time high, and if that happens, then we are, like, we're in the crosshairs, man. Like, all of our stormwater stuff may not work when the water gets that high. So yeah, so there's a lot more going into it than just that, but that's the governmental reality that we're dealing with, is that we need to be able to govern. Like, we need to be able to actually live here and call this place home. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing this. The other reason we're doing this is that we have this group of really motivated young people called the Nordic Nature Group, who came to the city council and made this request and said, hey, we're going to inherit this planet at some point, and we're not pleased with how you guys have been dealing with it. And we need you to do something about that right now, because we can't do anything about it right now, but you can. And so that movement is part of the I Matter movement, which I'm sure you've heard of. And they did a really good job of putting together a presentation and bringing it to the city council, and the city council signed on. So that we want to help you with this. We want to do this. And the resultant from that is the Climate Action Plan, which I sent you a draft from, which is kind of messy. It's kind of nice that we did our little interview today instead of yesterday, because yesterday after the funeral, I went to the Public Utilities Commission meeting and asked them if they thought that the draft Climate Action Plan was moving in the right direction, and whether or not it's something that they would promote, that they would get on board for. And they were really confused about why I wanted to talk to them about it. I was like, you guys are the policymakers for the public utility. If you're not on board with this, then we need to go back to the drawing board and figure out how we can make this be something that you'll be on board for. Because it would run into a brick wall, or the city council would have to go over their heads in order to further this, in which case then I find it hard to believe that the implementation of a climate action plan would be effective if the climate, or if the public utilities weren't even on board. So they signed up. They said that they agreed that this is the direction to move in, and that it's time to formalize the plan and get it to the public. So that's all really encouraging news about progress. Yeah.
So let me ask you a little bit more about that, because you just mentioned something that I was interested in getting into, is this, in addition to being a fairly popular tourist destination, Grand Marais is a small community on the North Shore. It's one of a few dozen Minnesota cities and about 2,000 across the U.S. that actually owns its electric utility. So you have this Public Utilities Commission that is making these decisions. You need their buy-in for the Climate Action Plan. What does that mean for how the city is getting its energy? Do you have a power plant in town that they manage? Where does the city get its energy, since that's going to be such a key piece of your climate action work?
We purchase all of our electricity, strangely enough, from the Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency, and we have purchased our power from them for a very long time. It's an interesting relationship, because they are the Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency, and we are one of the farthest northern Minnesota cities in the state. But the relationship has been both really good and also kind of strained at times. due to the fact that SIMPA has a buy all sell all policy, and I don't know if you're I mean, I'm sure you understand that to a certain extent, but we need to buy all of our electricity from SIMPA. So like all the electricity that goes to the public utility, we have to buy from SIMPA. And we also need to all the electricity that we sell is electricity that we have to get from SIMPA. So what that means is that when we start producing our own electricity, we have to produce that electricity and sell it all to SIMPA, and then they sell it back to us whenever we produce our own electricity. So that may sound really redundant and really ridiculous, but they've actually been willing to work with us a reasonable amount to make sure that we can do that. We put 40 kilowatts on our public works facility last year, and we have a pretty good arrangement with SIMPA that we're buying and selling at the same price, so that it's kind of a break-even situation.
This is great. You're answering my questions ahead of time. So you have this, sometimes they're called these all requirements contracts. It doesn't give you a whole lot of choice. It sounds like you've been able to do some of your own local energy production, but your goal is 100% renewable. Does that mean that you're looking in the long run to generate all of your energy, nearby to Grand Marais? Are you hoping that SIMPA makes some moves on it? And one of the things is this sort of circles back to my perhaps lame attempt to connect with sustainability, your meat preservation class, to this conversation about climate. But I noticed that SIMPA has a page on sustainability on their website where they're really interested in making sure people don't think of that word just in terms of the environment. And so it didn't seem to me like after reading that page that they were going to be super interested in saying, yeah, we can get to 100% renewable by 2040 or some other date, and make sure that all your electricity is coming from renewable resources. And so I'm just kind of curious about, do you feel like they're going to be able to help you do that? Or is there a way that Grand Marais can generate its own energy? What do you see as the path there working with them to get to your goals?
Well, there's two answers to that. The first answer to that is, with the same question, two different answers. So the first one is, yeah, they can help us get there. The way that they can help us get there is by selling us wind power. And SIMPA has already purchased into a massive solar or a massive wind power plant that's down in southwestern Minnesota, and so they have all of these credits for electricity, and we could buy credits from them, and then we would just be like, great, we're completely climate neutral. But that doesn't completely meet our needs as far as it being locally produced renewable energy. We need to make sure, and what we want to do, and what the Climate Action Plan calls for, is for all of the electricity that we consume in Grand Marais to be produced from renewable means. And so that means that all the stuff that comes through the wires needs to come from a clean power plant. And that's where the sticky wicket comes from, because all of SIMPA's generation is located in southern Minnesota. We are not. The actual moving electrons that we consume are produced by other plants that are up here in northern Minnesota, and most of those plants are either natural gas or coal. So that's where SIMPA can't really help us, because they don't have any power over those plants. What we're hoping to do is we're hoping to try and find some ways to lessen our requirements of electricity from outside sources, which could be solar, could be limited hydro, could be wind to a certain extent. But there are challenges to each of those renewable elements that we run into for obvious reasons. Hydro, we don't have that significant of an amount of flowing water year round to be able to operate something like that. Solar, in the winter, we don't get much sunlight. And then wind is a big concern for migrating birds, because the migration patterns go right along the ridge, which is where all the wind is. So that's going to be a definite concern, and to a certain extent, SIMPA will be able to help us. But they also won't be able to help us with that part of our goal, local production. That's going to have to be driven by other power companies, other communities, and also our own community as we bolster our own distributed generation plan. So.
You're listening to an interview with Jay Arrowsmith DeCoux, Mayor of Grand Marais, Minnesota, as part of our Voices of 100% series of local energy rules. Do you know any folks we should interview about 100% renewable energy commitments in their communities? If so, please send us an email at voicesof100@ilsr.org. That's voicesof100@ilsr.org. Stay tuned for the rest of this episode after a short message from our Energy Democracy Initiative Director, John Farrell.
Hey, thanks for listening to Local Energy Rules. If you've made it this far, you're obviously a fan, and we could use your help for just 2 minutes. As you've probably noticed, we don't have any corporate sponsors or ads for any of our podcasts. The reason is that our mission at ILSR is to reinvigorate democracy by decentralizing economic power. Instead, we rely on you, our listeners. Your donations not only underwrite this podcast, but also help us produce all of the research and resources that we make available on our website and all of the technical assistance we provide to grassroots organizations. Every year, ILSR's small staff helps hundreds of communities challenge monopoly power directly and rebuild their local economies. So please take a minute and go to ilsr.org and click on the donate button. And if making a donation isn't something you can do, please consider helping us in other ways. You can help other folks find this podcast by telling them about it, or by giving it a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. The more ratings from listeners like you, the more folks can find this podcast and ILSR's other podcasts, Community Broadband Bits, and Building Local Power. Thanks again for listening. Now, back to the program. So, one of the things I got a chance to read the draft climate action plan, or at least to skim through it yesterday, and I'm curious. The renewable electricity obviously is one really fundamental piece to it because energy is such a big component of your greenhouse gas emissions. But I'm curious, what are 2 other initiatives that are part of that plan that you think could have a big impact, either on emissions or on the local economy? And for example, do you have anything that focus on like low-income folks? That's been a big part of other climate and energy work that we've seen, either helping them save energy or, get to be part of a community solar array or something like that.
We have talked about community solar as a possibility, and also, there's been a fair amount of excitement in the different communities of faith up here too. Like church groups are actually interested in putting solar panels on their church buildings, because these church buildings have these massive south-facing roof lines. But we haven't been able to figure out how that works with the simple contract, because the churches just want to lease out their roofs, and somebody has to own and operate that community solar then, and it can't be the city because we can't buy or sell from anyone other than Simpa. So that's been kind of a stumbling block, so to speak, for trying to figure that out. Other parts of the plan that we've identified, now electricity is the biggest one. So that one, is more than half of our total greenhouse gas emissions is our electricity consumption. But then what we have is we also have transportation, and this next year we're putting in the first electric car charging stations in the city, and so that's part of that plan. But that's also something that needs to be driven on a national level, because we are not going to single-handedly change the auto industry, to start producing more and more and more electric cars, which hopefully they will do. Another thing that we can deal with is we can deal with waste. There has been talk about creating a composting system here in Cook County that would compost the majority of the organic waste that is produced, and that would reduce the amount of money that we have to pay for shipping our garbage down the shore. Little known fact, there is no garbage dump in Cook County. All of the waste that is produced in Cook County is trucked via dump truck to Duluth. So that's the nearest dump that we utilize. So huge carbon footprint on that. Every day there's a dump truck that goes down to that dumps off our trash from up here. So it's a pretty ridiculous thing. So if we can remove all the organics, we can reduce, several hundred tons of garbage a year from having to be hauled down to Duluth and disposed of. And it also creates a resource up here, which soil we don't have any soil. So those are a couple of them. One of the big issues that we have that we're still struggling with is home heating. Home heating is a huge consumer of fossil fuels up here. We don't have natural gas in the community. We have propane tanks, like everybody has their own propane tank or fuel oil tank. There are a couple of houses up here that are off-peak electric, but generally what people say about the off-peak electric is that it's tremendously expensive to heat a house that way, even with the off-peak. So we're trying to crack that code. That's a pretty tricky one though, as far as what kind of incentives can we put forward. We've been the public utility has been talking about potentially having some kind of a incentive to put a high efficiency electric off-peak boiler in, or off-peak heaters into your house. That would then get you off of fossil fuels and get you onto electricity. Because if we get more people onto electricity, then we know what the consumption is that we have to produce in order to be clean. And so that electrification is something we're going to talk about incentivizing. We had talked about, I don't know if you were aware of this, we had talked about and developed a plan for a biomass district heating plant for Grand Marais, which would have serviced all of the government buildings and potentially the downtown area. But the initial cost to get it built and such were so astronomical that we couldn't feasibly do that, especially as long as propane stayed cheap. So,
do you guys? Sorry to go in technical weeds a little bit, but I know that
there
has been some other interest in like cold climate heat pumps. Obviously it gets a little too cold, and especially when it's polar vortex cold, they don't even really work. But for most of the year round, they can do heating and cooling, and they also, I believe, can be used for domestic hot water. So you'd have to have a backup, but my understanding is that they're way more efficient than like an electric boiler or electric resistance heating. But the problem right now is just sort of, especially in these really cold climates like, Grand Marais or even in Minneapolis, there's a limit to how much they work in the winter. Are you looking at those at all?
We haven't really been looking at those. One of the other options that we've been looking at that is actually surprisingly efficient up here, it still requires a backup, of course, but still surprisingly efficient is just simply solar thermal. In the polar vortex situation, it was so cold, but it was sunny. So there's a couple of families up here that have off-peak, or not off-peak. There's a couple of families up here that have solar thermal set up, and when it was negative 12 degrees outside, they were producing 120 degree water for their house. That kind of a thing is something that we need to take a look at, as far as a possibility. The pumps we haven't looked at very hard.
I was hoping to just wrap up with kind of a standard question that I ask a lot of communities that have made fairly substantial climate commitments, like Grand Marais has done, which is, it's one of over 100 cities across the country that have made 100% renewable energy commitment. And like, what advice would you give to other communities that are starting down this path, whether they're having a debate at city council about it, or maybe there's a group that's organizing in the community? How do you get started on it? How do you get that kind of commitment made? But then what do you recommend they're thinking about as they're making that commitment about how they can actually accomplish it?
That's a really good question. In our experience specifically, there was, we had a pretty significant push going, towards doing something like this, and that was from the kids in the community. So that may not happen in every single community, but when they start looking at a climate action plan or climate neutrality or however you want to phrase it. The biggest thing that I can say to encourage other municipalities is that, you really do have a couple of choices here. You have a choice to do this now and be ahead of the game, or do this later and be kind of struggling to catch up. And that's where we feel like a big motivation for us is to try and get the groundwork laid for this, so that when resources start becoming available on the state and federal level, because we realize that this is actually a really big deal and we really need to address this as soon as we can, that then you have the framework and the rubric in place that you can go for it. That's what I have, that's from my personal experience. The other thing is, you've got to be really careful not to get down in the weeds right away. You have to identify what you're trying to do, and then keep on it. But a lot of that is just straight up brainstorming and stealing shamelessly from other organizations that have already done the same work. And there is nothing wrong with that. Like, we're trying to do something here that's going to impact the future generations of the planet. It does not matter if we borrow information or models from other cities. Just use it. Go for it. We need to work together if we're going to solve this problem. So that might be a bit of a long-winded way of saying it, but
I think it's great, and it's in some ways no better way to wrap up, because of course we're just wrapping up a podcast in which hopefully folks from other communities across the country can take a little inspiration about what Grand Marais is committing to, even as a small community, and learn that it is possible to take action at that scale, and that there are some lessons that they can learn as well. So, Jay, thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and if anybody does get motivated by this and wants to have a discussion about it, I'm totally game for that.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of our Voices of 100% series, where our host John Farrell was speaking with Jay Arrowsmith DeCoux, mayor of Grand Marais, Minnesota, about the city's commitment to clean energy and some of the lessons this small town has learned as it transforms its energy system. To learn about other challenges small cities have faced in their pursuit of local clean energy, we recommend listening to our recent podcast episode with Bill Schnell from Grand Rapids, Minnesota, one of more than 70 past episodes released as part of our Local Energy Rules podcast. To learn more about cities that have made ambitious commitments to 100% renewable energy and how they are meeting these goals, check out other episodes produced as part of this Voices of 100% series, and explore ILSR's interactive community power map, which is available at ilsr.org. While you're on our website, you can also sign up for one of our newsletters and connect with us on social media. Tune back into Local Energy Rules, now every 2 weeks, to hear more powerful stories of communities taking on concentrated power to transform the energy system. Until next time, keep your energy local, and thanks for listening.